Okay, hi there. I'm back to finish the stream that I started about a week ago. If you haven't seen the other stream yet, might be good to start with that because there I provide the context of what exactly I'm working on and what it is that we'll be going over and at what level. But this is basically porting a Python script to Rust. So I'm going to jump right in and continue where I was in that. So where we finished last time was basically here we've got a basic Rust program that goes to Google Sheets and starts doing some error handling. And we finished with the idea of basically starting to add tests here to more appropriately check that everything's going on in the way that we want it to be going on. So I'm going to start with writing some tests for what it is exactly that I'm doing here. So I've got the test infrastructure, and basically what I want to check is I want to do some stubbing of values I worked out last time. This crate that I'm using goes to Google Sheets, makes a request to Google Sheets, but in the test suite I don't want to make a request to Google Sheets, so I'm going to have to do some stubbing over that test suite. I don't actually know how to do test stubbing in Rust, so I'm going to have to look that up. Okay, so suggest using this mock-all crate. Mock-all provides tools to create mock versions of almost any trait or struct. They can be used as unit tests and stand-in for the real object. So this is good. This provides me with this macro for mocking traits and I guess structs. But what I'm trying to do here, I think, is mock the whole crate. The whole sheet's for crate. Mock a crate in tests. It's generally uncommon to mock things in Rust, but mock-all is there. It's much better to write code as purely as possible, where it is self-contained and operates on its inputs and produces an output, and then to have a very minimal amount of code that wraps it in is subject to functional testing against, e.g. real databases. All right, so that's good advice. Instead of trying to mock this crate, what it's saying that I should do is re-architect my code so that I can test functions more specifically, which is quite good advice. So I'm going to re-architect this code in functions. Okay, so let's just walk through what this does. I have a client, I connect to it. I construct it, sorry, I haven't yet connected to it. I set up my args. I set up my authentication. This gives me an authenticator object. And then I actually make the request here in the $await, and it returns a result response body value range. So I'm going to make a function that takes in this current thread IDs object and unpacks it basically. So let's unpack. There's probably something that I am trying to do here in the current thread IDs, which is to, so let's just call it check thread IDs to begin with, because basically what I'm doing is I'm making sure that there's been no error in the attempted fetch of the thread IDs from the Google Sheet. So I'm going to call it check thread IDs, and it's going to take a thread IDs and will return probably an option. No, it's going to return a result of a let's just see if I can just return a result. No, I need generics. What is thread IDs again? It is result of a response body, and ultimately I unpack it into a vec of I32 objects. So this is going to return a result of a vec. Oops, sorry. A vec of I32 objects, and I think that's what I want. So this doesn't only check the thread IDs, it basically unpacks the thread IDs, because what it's going to do is take this result of the result that this do it await call returns basically, and unpack it into a more usable function. So I'm going to say here, let thread IDs equals unpack thread IDs, where I pass in the current thread IDs. Oops. Current thread IDs. And then I'm going to take this and put it inside my function. Great. Mismatch types. Expected result vec I32. Sheets error. Yes. So this code that was running before is no longer returning. Isn't returning this, because I think I was just, what was I returning before? I was returning some sort of result. Map collect. I wasn't actually returning anything here. So this iteration is essentially what I want to return, but I was just printing it. So let's get rid of that, and let's see if I can work through this. Okay, so before I put in these to-dos, which were if we had run into these errors, we need to go straight to the end of the pass, and now I have the kind of function structure to do that. All I need to return here is a result that is an error of an error bad request. So this is kind of my hack at the moment for passing in an I32, because I'm using the error type from the Google API's common. So after I think what I'm going to do in after this is I'm going to create my own error type and work through the details of my own error type. But for the time being, I'm just going to use the error types that exist in the Google API's common to see if I can get something that will compile. So that returns that now. I'm also going to return error cancel there. this is an if let that ends there. Where is the match end? Match ends at the end there. So I guess if I don't hit that if let, I need to return something. And if I hit an error here, I also need to return something. Error cancelled. Okay. So this should be okay now. Let thread IDs returns the result of the vec thread IDs, and just to see where I'm at with this, I'm going to print the thread IDs that are returned here. Okay, let's try run this. Yes, so it's given me an error because I have not told Rust what kind of type this is. The kind of type this is current thread IDs here, which is a result of response body value range. So I'm going to have to import these types from where they come from. I think these are hypertypes. A good way to check would be to see what this returns. Yeah, so the doit function returns client result hyper response hyper body value range. Let me just copy that. See if it will allow me to just pass this in here. Yes, so it doesn't know what client is because client in the doit refers to, I assume that's a hyper client. Use crate client. It's the Google Sheets client. Okay, so maybe I can import it directly from Google Sheets. Use Sheets client. Oh, there's here a hyper client. I wonder if it will let me. This is probably not right. Yeah, so the Google Sheets seems to have its own client type, which is presumably in here. And it's the Google API's comment. So I'm just going to import it from there to make sure that the types match. Maybe just to be explicit, I forget how to do a use statement in Rust rename. Yeah, so I want to do this as other function, just because client's quite a generic name here. So I think I would prefer to say that's a Sheets for client, let's say. Yeah, so then I can say that what this function takes in is a sheets for client result that is generic over a tuple of a hyper response, hyper body body, and value range. Where's it getting that value range from? Also from Google Sheets. Did I already import it? Yes. Okay. Sheets API value range. Great. Okay. So the function ran, but it returned error cancelled, which means I must have hit one of these return statements, or this one, I suppose, or even this one. The issue is that I don't know which one it is because I've just made a generic error for all of these things and returned error cancelled. So this is a good time to get into Rust error handling at a sort of slightly deeper level and think about creating my own error type so that I can kind of mediate the errors that are used, the internal errors that my code uses, or rather the kinds of errors that I want to handle that might be errors that come from other crates or other bits of code that my own Rust code is using. And I want to turn those other bits of code, the error types of those other bits of code, into a kind of standardized error type, or an error type that pertains to my code in particular, so that I can be clearer to myself and also to any client code that might use this code if I were writing a library or something like that. What exactly is going wrong in terms of my code, not in terms of the underlying things that I'm using. So to do that, I'm going to use a crate called anyhow, which is again, as I understand it, in my kind of limited Rust experience, the sort of standard way to do this kind of error handling in Rust. So anyhow gives you a result type, which is generic over an anyhow error, which will make writing this kind of error handling that I've been skirting around a little bit easier because of what the anyhow crate does. So let me import it so that I can get started. Version 1.075, cargo toml. Okay. Anyhow, so I don't fully, I haven't used anyhow extensively, and I also haven't used it even in a shallow way in a while. So I'm going to have to kind of read through and work out exactly how anyhow works. What is the best way for me to do that? Okay, so this is a blog that I found, most popular way, and this hopefully will just give me a basic overview of what anyhow is and how I can use it. The most useful feature of anyhow is result T. Result T and not result TU is the one provided in the standard library. Yeah, so anyhow, basically, instead of result TU, which is in the standard library, in which you need a result as a generic type over both the kind of OK value and the error value. So T is the OK value and U is the error value. Anyhow gives you a result T so that it kind of abstracts out that specific error handling because it's going to be handled by a more generic kind of way of handling handling errors. So this is an example of, I think, how we should understand what anyhow is doing. Normally you specify a result like this, where you say the type T is this unit type, and the error type is a string type, or in this case here, unit type is the OK type, standard IO error is the error type. We want something more like this, in which the error type is a kind of more generic type, so that we can deal with all, like we can substitute our own type in for that error type, rather than having to cast everything to a standard IO error type or something like this. So this box din error syntax, din there stands for dynamic, is a way to say the error type over which this result is generic is some sort of error type, or some sort of type that implements the error trait, is rather what that is saying, that is stored on the heap, so that is in the box. A solution could be to alias your own result t to result t boxed in error, but a better solution is to use the anyhow crate, which exposes its own result t type as well as other useful things. This is how you use it. Use anyhow result, and then you can use a result that is generic over one type, which is just the OK type, rather than the error type as well. So let's try that and see how far it gets us. Okay, so I previously imported this result type. Oh, that might have been messing with some things. Okay, so I previously imported this result type from the Google Sheets crate, which is its own universal result type, which is used as a return for all calls. So when using this Google Sheets crate, this result type is the result that all of its methods will return. So in my code, I don't actually want to make all of my errors the same, or make all of my results rather the same kinds of results that are used by the underlying Sheets 4 interface. Sorry, 1 second while I just check my streaming. There may be an issue. Okay, I think we're back. It may just be that my internet streaming is not great, but I guess that is something I will deal with afterwards. Hopefully it's okay. Let me just try one more thing to see if I can fix it. Okay, I think I'm just going to continue. It's maybe an internet slowness connection on my end, but I'm just going to have to work through it, and then maybe I'll try to fix it for the next stream. Okay, so I'm working with anyhow results here, and I already have imported this result type from Sheets 4, and I'm using it kind of across my code, which is not great because it could be kind of confusing. So instead I want to use the anyhow result, and then I'm going to have to fix these cases where I've assumed that I'm using the Sheets 4 result. So one way to fix these errors quickly will be to just be explicit, to say that in those cases where I was using result before, I'm going to use Sheets 4 result. I think that was the only place that I was using it, so that's good. But now I'm getting this error that is telling me that, great. In several lines, I'm expecting an anyhow error, but instead I found a Sheets 4 error. So this is exactly the change that I wanted to make, because this result here, that unpack thread IDs now returns, refers to an anyhow result, and the anyhow result expects an anyhow error. So when I try to return this error, which is specifically a Google Sheets 4 error, it is giving me the suggestion to say that one thing I could do is I could call into to convert the Sheets 4 error into an anyhow error, which would solve the compile time errors, but it's not actually what I wanted to do in importing the anyhow error. What I wanted to do by importing the anyhow crate was to make these errors more specific, to make my own error type, basically, into which I can encode the different kinds of error cases that exist in my code. So to do that, I need to create my own error type. So this blog says that one way to do this is to create an enum, which represents your custom errors. And I quite like this approach, so I'm going to go with it and see how far it gets me. I'm going to call this enum let's call it so I could call it something like edstem error. This is why it would have been good to have a slightly better name than edstem sync for the entire crate, because edstem error implies that it is an error with edstem, which is not necessarily, because this crate actually deals with both Google Sheets and edstem and tries to do something across both of those services. So as a stand-in for that at the moment, I'm just going to call this, error is not a great name. I'm going to call it ed error. Let's call it ed error. So now in this enum, I can kind of detail the different error cases that I want to encode in my code here, and give them kind of descriptive names to be clearer about which part of the code I reached an error, and then I can do the appropriate thing with that at a higher level, or just in my own debugging process, it will at least point me to, in this case, before I had these compile errors, when the code runs successfully but I don't get back what I want, it will just return an error that is more descriptive of where it reached in the code. So the first is the first error case that I want to encode is here, which no longer has a to-do there. And basically this means that the get operation for Google Sheets on the column didn't return 200. So that error is something like failed to retrieve Google Sheet column, I'm going to say. And then this error that I can return is instead the enum failed to retrieve Google Sheet column. Sorry, it should be ed error failed to retrieve Google Sheet column. But it still doesn't like this because this ed error failed to retrieve Google Sheet column is not an anyhow error in any sense. It's just an enum. So there are multiple ways I can turn this into a anyhow error. The simplest of which is to use the anyhow macro that is provided here, which can just turn a enum into an anyhow error. The other way, and I think this is the more robust way to do it, is to implement the trait standard error for the enum. This is, I think, what I want to do. Not for my errors, but for ed error. And it doesn't like this, so it can't implement the standard, can't implement the error trait because ed error does not implement standard format display, it only implements debug. I'm pretty sure that I cannot derive the display trait. Yeah, so I actually have to implement the display trait. Right. Format results. So the difference between debug and display is display is supposed to give a like if I correctly remember, yeah, they're basically different kinds of formatting the actual type when you want to print it. So it does allow you to derive, Rust does allow you to derive the debug trait for an enum because there's some sort of way that it can fall back to just printing the name of the type. For whatever reason, it does not allow you to derive display. Yeah, so it says display is similar to debug, but display is for user-facing output and so cannot be derived. So the debug trait here is one that Rust is happy for to derive itself because it's not intended to be shown to anyone in particular. It's just meant to be used for debugging information when I try to print a value that has the ed error type, for example. The display trait, on the other hand, it forces you to be explicit about what you want to show to the user when they try to print this type. In my case, I think I'm just going to default to printing whatever Rust wants to do when it formats this into a string. for the time being. Okay, so now the ed error type should have the debug trait, the display trait, and it should implement standard error, and it can do this happily now because it implements the debug trait. However, it still does not want to be recognized as an anyhow error. So this is probably because I may still need to use the anyhow. Oh, okay, so this is because, yeah, one way of getting my enum to be an anyhow error is to just use the anyhow macro. One-off error messages can be constructed using the anyhow macro, but the suggested way to do it is to use the error macro, I think. To indicate that each of these enum variants are meant to be different error types. And it looks like if I use that, I can derive the error type as well. I am going to need to import the error macro. This is a guess, I don't know. No, that's not how I'm supposed to do it. Macros. This library provides anyhow error. Anyhow works with any error type that has an impl of standard error, including ones defined in your code. We do not bundle a derived error macro, but you can write the impls yourself or use a standalone macro like this error. Oh, so this error is another crate which provides a convenience derived macro. Oh, okay, I see. So, okay, so this error crate just seems to it just reformats this code. It just allows me to write this code basically using a macro like this so that I can be more specific about which error I actually return for each variant of the enum. It's kind of nice, so I might use it. Yeah, so you can see that I've done the same thing with the sheets 4 error here, where I'm relying on this import in places, whereas I actually want to be more explicit and say where exactly this error came from. This is not great actually. So I might do this instead. Use this. Yeah. Cool. So now I'm using anyhow result this error. I don't need to do those myself any longer because I'm using this error to derive this from something like this, and this is from the example again. Yeah, so the macro here basically allows me to, if this enum took some arguments, like a string or something, because Rust enums allow you to do this kind of thing, I would be able to then use that string in the error message or something like this. So for the time being, I'm just going to say my error doesn't use any arguments, and it's just going to say failed to, or it's going to say request to Google Sheets API didn't return 200. Cool. Just clean some of this stuff up here. No longer using that. Standard thread current. Don't remember where that was from, but I'm not using it. Okay, so that error is now here. Still giving me an error, saying this is not an anyhow error, presumably because I do need to use the anyhow macro, but return error anyhow. It's not because I need to use the anyhow macro, it's because I still need to make it an error. And then it wants me to use into. Yeah, so it still expects a generic anyhow error here as the argument to error. But I just want to check that this is the expected way to use anyhow. Use question mark to easily propagate any error that implements the standard error trait. So maybe what it's, maybe what it is expecting me to do here that feels a bit weird, but I think it is actually right. So this question mark syntax propagates. So I think the question mark syntax does something similar to this kind of thing, return error, but it also puts this into here. And maybe does one or two other things in order to appropriately get from to get to what I'm trying to do here, which is to say that I have this kind of error, my own error type that I've implemented, and I want to return some sort of I want to return a variant of that enum, but in order to satisfy the type requirements of this function, it needs to actually return an error, And the question mark is just a way to propagate that error through. So what it basically means is that if I hit this line of code, this function will return a error that is an anyhow error, which is what this result type that I'm now using from anyhow requires. But because this type, this enum implements standard error, implements the trait error, the Rust can figure out basically how to turn this into an anyhow error by use of this question mark syntax or syntactic sugar. I think that's right. So I'm going to keep going through and do a similar thing in the other cases. If values len is not equal to 1, this means that this is a strange case to reach, because it's a strange case to reach in the control flow of the code as I have it currently, because I'm always passing in this thread ID range, which is a single column. But if I were to say create a result, a value of a similar type here, that where this thread ID range was more than one column, the code in this function relies on there only being one value, or at least expects to throw away all of the other columns. So this unpack thread IDs function is kind of making an assumption that though this type does not specify that there should only be one column in here, because it's just a generic result that is returned from the Google Sheets API, it's actually kind of more specific than that. So if I were trying to be really fancy, I could kind of make a more specific type that would be indicative of this, and then I wouldn't have to reach this error case, because the type itself would confirm that I was never passing in something to this function that wouldn't have more than one column. But that's quite fancy, and I think it's better here to just create this as an error case to say ed error unpacking, or unpacking is quite an unspecific word, Google Sheet column or Google Sheet values retrieved is not single column. So there's a bit of leakage here between what's going on, because if I were really trying to encapsulate this method well, I would not want this kind of leakage between this error type has the kind of idea of retrieving values, and so does this have the idea of retrieving values. Actually, I think it's okay, because the value that I'm passing in is something that has been retrieved from, it's a type that represents something that has been retrieved from the Google Sheets API. And so these errors that I'm propagating are basically errors where the value that's been passed in as an argument is legitimate, but it's not legitimate for the use case that this function is performing. So I think that's actually okay. I'm going to add that as a type up here. I'm going to give it a slightly more descriptive message request to Google Sheets API. contain more than a single, or was not a single column. And now that checks out, it propagates up. It's interesting that it's still okay with this. Returning this error. I guess it's because I'm not actually returning anything here. So I'm just declaring this let values thing here. But what I actually want to do is return the result of this. And now it's going to start to complain. Map dot collect. The method call chain might not have had the expected types. Okay, so something's going on there, but let me just create error types for these other things first. Okay, so match, if I get to this case, it is, there's some sort of error that's gone wrong with Google Sheets. So I can say error E, and I think I can just, yeah, so I've got a match statement here that unpacks this into an OK and an error, but now that I've got proper error handling in this function, I can do this no longer as a match statement, but just propagate whatever error comes out here up through a slightly different control flow, and I just need to remind myself of what it is. It's something like thread IDs or else. How am I going to search for this? Rust. Unpack result if okay, otherwise propagate. It's probably not gonna tell me exactly what I want, but let's see if I can remind myself. Expect. Result, Rust, result, map. Yeah, so I think I actually want to map here. So because thread IDs is a result, I want to do something with it. This is what this function does, right? I want to do something with it if it's let me just bring back that error so that I can make sure I get the control flow right. I want to do something with it if it's okay, but if it's not okay, I just want to propagate it up. Propagate whatever that error is up. So the way I could do that is to say thread IDs, because it is a result, I can propagate the error up through this question mark syntax. But if I just run this, then it's only going to check if it's an error, and it's not going to do anything with it if it's okay. So what I actually want to do is map it, which will allow me to take that this okay response to do something similar to what I'm doing in this match statement, basically, where I can say this is a response and a value range, and in that case do these things. Yep. No, it's not happy with me. It's saying there's a mismatch closing the limiter. This is because I think I missed a couple of I think I still need these ones. Yeah. Oh, I also haven't closed this map, so there we go. Now I've closed the map properly. And that's giving me an error on this thing. Trait from it error is not implemented for sheets 4 error. Couldn't convert the error to sheets 4 error. Why does it want it to be a sheets 4 error? Okay, so let me try this another way then. As you can see, I have not written Rust in a while, and I don't remember the idioms. This is definitely not the idiomatic way to do it. Something's still going wrong here. Okay, so I've just tried to change the control flow here, where I'm going to say if thread IDs, okay, this is actually what I meant to do. So if thread IDs is an error, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I was trying to do. So if thread IDs is an error, I want to propagate that error up basically, and the question mark can turn it into a anyhow error appropriately. So I want to try to unwrap it. This question mark is basically try to unwrap the thing, and if it's an error, return the error. Otherwise, I want to unpack the results. If it is an okay, then I want to unpack the results, and then I can do these other checks here, and I can start running these checks. Okay, great. So back to this case down here. If I reach this case, then it means this if let sum was not appropriate. If let sum values range equals values, so this is basically no values could be found. Okay, so now we're back to fixing this code down here. What is this error that it's giving me? A value of type unit cannot be built from an iterator over elements of type result. So this is the dot collect that is called on the dot map there. So I'm going to put a let statement here, and it's going to be let the values that I want to return in the positive case are unpacked thread IDs, let's say. Yes. The unpacked thread IDs are going to be a vector, and I'm going to allow it to infer the type of unpacked thread IDs. And what I'm going to return at the end of the unpacked thread IDs block is the unpacked thread IDs I think this is supposed to be a result. Because, yeah, so what I'm trying to do here, let me just make this a bit more explicit by saying let t equal unpack thread IDs. Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, so the unpack, it was a little bit unclear what type the unpacked thread IDs was here, but here you can see the Rust compiler knows that the unpacked thread IDs is going to be a vec of results of I32s and error, so that I think this is a standard library result rather than an anyhow result. And the reason it is this type, if we remember from last time, is because vec offers a way, if there's a single error in one of these, in this loop, in this map loop, I want to check that every single element in this vec is okay and not an error. So let me remind myself how to do that. Vec of results in Rust. Iterating over results. Ignore the failed items. Collect the failed items with map error. Map error calls a function with the error. Fail the entire operation with collect. So I feel like I want this to be a result of a vec of I32s. But it's currently not. Why is that? So first let me fix this to return not a sheets for error, but my own error, which is going to be, it was called what was it called? Ed error. And in this case, I'm saying map value. This S is a string that comes from the V. Let's just call it value is empty. Yeah. Value in cell is empty, and in this case it is ed error value in cell is not a number. Value in cell is not a number. Value in cell is empty. Missing error. Cool. Yeah, so this is better now. Now it's a result of I32s that have an ed error rather than that Google Sheets 4 error type. But it's still a vec of results, and I want the whole thing. I basically want to propagate the error upwards. And I thought I had done that over the entire vec before, but obviously I have not. When you look at results, you'll note that everything is still wrapped in a result. It's true. A little more boilerplate is needed for this, using the partition. Errors, numbers, errors, partition, result. Oh, interesting. So numbers errors, partition result is okay. Comes after the map. Nope. Partition is replace. Whoa. Type must be known. It's not quite right. Oops. Map. Numbers into result unwrap error. Maybe I want this. Fail the entire operation with click. Result implements from iterator so that a vector of results, can be turned into a result with a vector. That's what I want. Once a result error is found. Oh, maybe I just need to use these type annotations properly. So maybe the reason this is a vec of results is because I've told it up here it's a vec of results and not a result of vecs. Yes. Now I'm getting another error. Value of type result vec anyhow error cannot be built from. Yeah, so now there's an error. Ed error, anyhow error. So I need to turn these ed errors into a anyhow error, for which the appropriate thing would be to use the anyhow macro, I feel. But I don't have the anyhow macro in scope at the moment. And this is because use anyhow. I haven't imported it. Likes this one now, doesn't like this one. Expected error found result I32. Maybe I can just do this. Yeah. Makes everything nicer. And I return OK in. Expected an error. Maybe because I didn't propagate this. That is, I think, it. Yeah, so turns out I didn't know how to use the anyhow macro, so I'm just going to stick with the way that I do know how to use it. And this is now a bit better. Okay, so T, if I now were to propagate this error as well, it's a result. If so the issue here is that I've lost the specificity of this error that I propagated up through this question mark, where I used to have a value in cell is not passed, and now I'm not sure what that anyhow error that will turn into is. But what I'm going to do is just print what's going on and see if I can make any progress. Oops. Okay. So now I'm getting two things. One is an okay result that seems to have a bunch of I32s in it. And the second is an error that says no values in the Google Sheet response. And this is because I haven't returned anything from this method. So down here, when I'm printing the thread IDs, it's getting an error, but here it's everything's going okay. So what I want to do here is just return. Let's see if I can just return those. No, I can't return those directly because I need the type annotation, I think. So I'm going to see if I can do it there. You might have meant to return this. Cool. And now I'm only printing it here. So now I should just see a positive result. No error. Great. Okay. So that was some good restructuring, but I haven't actually added anything to here other than specific error handling. But I don't have any way of checking what's going on in that error handling. So I'm going to do that now with a test, because this function is now much more testable than it was before when it was in here. Okay, so test unpack thread IDs. The first test is to check this. If the response status is not 200, then will it return this value? And in order to test this function, I'm going to have to construct this kind of type. how is it that I will construct this type? Sheets for client, hyper response. So the way that I constructed this type in this code was to call the doit, but I don't actually want to do it. I want to construct the type, but I want to fill the type with my own things. There might be something in the sheets for API. That allows me to do this. Method builders, nope. Handling errors. I probably should have read this before. It might have saved me some time. Okay, I think I might just be quicker to try to construct it and see how it complains. So I need a sheets for client result. Okay, so it definitely is not going to let me do this kind of thing because I'm trying to construct the result of this tuple, but a result is a standard result, which is just the standard OK error, but with a T error. So the way to do this is to construct a OK, but I need an actual hyper response, hyper body. Response is just a struct that has a head, which is parts, and a body. So let me create the response, which is hyper, oops, body. Nope. Let's just put a 0 for now. And so hidden parts. Okay, so there's two types here. There's a hyper body and a hyper response. The hyper response has a head and a body. Getting confused by all the words here. Head is of a parts type, body is of T. So the body here must be a hyper body. And this is just a hyper response. Head should be a parts. Hyper body should be a struct with kind and an extra. Kind and extra. Kind is a kind. Kind isn't a num. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is stub a hyper response. I have a feeling that someone has probably done this before. Hyper clients that don't touch the network. The request to responses using predefined functions. 5 years ago, that's not super promising. So I don't really want to use this code because it's another dependency and it was 5 years ago, but I might look into it to see what exactly it's doing to actually create these hyper responses. See if it's doing something with the same head and parts thing. Doesn't seem to be. Response new. Great, so I can create a new response in Hyper using response new, which is much easier than this. Create a new blank response with the body. The one issue here is that I'm not fully sure what kind of body I want in here. But what I can do is check. Because I know that this code is going to return a positive body, so print line current thread IDs unwrap let let R T VR value range R saying I want to call this as ref and I'm just going to return there for now. Nope, I can't return there because I must return. Why can't I return there? Okay, well I can comment out that code. So the status here is 200. The body is a body streaming. Yeah, so I think I actually want to do something very similar to this in this particular test that I'm writing, because in this particular test, I don't actually care about the body. I just want to check that returns error if not status 200. So I can do this. This needs to be a hyper response. This presumably needs to be a hyper status code. And this needs to be a hyper response. From parts, let's call that resp, that one as well. And then I can say I have a hyper response here. Arguments to this function are incorrect. That's because the value range here. So this needs to be a value range. Which seems like I can just construct. Major dimension, option string, doesn't matter. Range, option string, doesn't matter. And values, option, doesn't matter. Arguments to this function are incorrect. Now this is an error, but an issue because T should be a correct. Expected response body dot 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 found response at string. This is because hyper response must be over a hyper body. So what happened to my hyper body here? Body. So body is a generic type T, and in this case, the generic type T is a body streaming. So What I need is a constructor new for the body. But I do need to work out where the streaming thing is coming from. Let's just see if I can get started with this kind of thing. Hyperbody from, this is what I want. Converts this into the static. Converts a string into a body type. Okay, so I can probably do hyperbody from static. Is there a from? No. From. Value string. Okay, it doesn't give me any type errors now. What I want to assert is that this is an anyhow error. But I really want to assert that this is an anyhow error, but I want to assert that it is this error in particular. And because I'm not exactly certain how the question mark syntax is working here, I guess I'm going to work that out as I get into trying to write a test for how the anyhow error works. New error from error. So I'm only using the anyhow result at the moment, but if I maybe do this, then I should be able to say anyhow error new from my own error failed to retrieve Google Sheets column. Mismatch declosing delimiter. Binary operation equal cannot be applied to. Result VECI2 anyhow error. Testing anyhow error types. I was hoping there was an easier way to do it. This, if you want to set this type of the error, that would be error.downcastRef specific error unwrap. Okay, so I guess I have this unwrap error returns the contain error value. So if I unwrap the error, and then I cast it to or turn it into a string, then if I check that that string is the same as this string, oh, great. Okay, so that seems to be what I want to test. The only issue here is that if I decided to change that error message for some reason, it's not so great to put it in directly there. So I'd be better to use the toString function on the actual type. Failed to retrieve toString. Great. And now I have this kind of stubbing infrastructure underway. So I can write some more tests. It's interesting, the only thing I actually use this resp for is to check the resp status. Yeah, which is fine. It just means that it's useful for stubbing because I don't really need to build up this resp in any major way. T here I should probably call thread IDs. And then I can just do the same thing here and say the value range major dimension is some columns. Some columns to string. The range, do I actually check the range? I don't actually use the range, so do I use the major dimension? Yeah, so I was doing it in the wrong place anyway, but so because I don't actually, this is just what the value range is what the Google Sheets method returns. I have to specify the major dimension in the range so that it can populate the values, but in testing, those can just be none. And then I can set my values to some value that looks like this, to what I expect coming back, that is, which is a sum vec, a vec of vec. So I'm not going to let me do that. Where I have some strings in there. Let's just try one to string and see if it's going to let me do that. Try wrapping the expression insert JSON value string. Right. Use JSON. So because these vecs are not actually strings, they are certi JSON strings, I need to use this JSON macro and then put a string in there. If so, the next error I'm checking is if the values is not a single column. So that would be if, let's type that in first, if values not single column. And this would look like this, I'm pretty sure. Sort of cloning the value if the move occurs before. Yeah, so this just tests, so it's fine. I'm just going to clone it. The error is Google Sheets value retrieved is not a single column. Great, test passed. Then I want to check the next test, which is value in cell. Whoops. Value in cell is not empty. Or value in cell is empty, and this is so if I have if it's correct, but the value inside there is empty. I'm not sure how to create the equivalent of an empty value. I guess it's an empty string. If value contains empty. These no longer need to be cloned because I'm just using it once. And let me just do some basic. So these are legitimate because this is basically a test to check that my code accurately checks that this empty case returns an error. Can't remember the name of the error. Value in cell is not empty. And this kind of checks my loop thing as well, because this should only return a single error, obviously, because these two are good, but this one's bad. Let's try that. No, just failed. Cannot pass integer for an empty string. Yes, okay. So this is not hitting this error code because an empty string is not, obviously not this match S here. S is an option. V is a value. S is value as string. So it just means I haven't stuffed it correctly to hit that error case. Because I need to create a none JSON object, like a null kind of thing. JSON null. Okay. Great. JSON null. And now we're going to get to that other case, which is going to mean if value contains a non-number. So, I mean, I should probably do a couple of things here for this test. This would be res1. I'm going to do a res2 as well. Let values, thread IDs, values 1, values 2, let's put, oops, some vec. Okay, I can make a little stub test here, which is called helper function rather, which is make value range with some values, which is a vec of, should be able to do generic here, and it returns a value range. I'm just doing the value range part of this. These some vec, some these. So this should actually be a vec of vecs. Use type parameters instead, t. So I think they're saying I should do this. Type constructor contains vec tt due to the argument passed. Yes, it's actually not a generic type there. It is a 30 JSON. Value. Yeah. Make value range. I guess it's actually an option over all of those, because that will mean I can do this, which is match V's. If it is sum underscore V's, then return, oh, my keyboard. This value. So, yep, that's better. If it's sum, if it's none, return none. And something's wrong with my indentation. Match arms have incompatible types. I am always returning a value range. It's true. I shouldn't have tried the option thing. I can just do that at the outer layer. That's good. So in that case, I can still do none. In this case, I can do yeah. So it's basically only for these ones. Make value range. Oh, I just realized it's got very dark. Okay. Something's going wrong here. It's better. Can I make that look any nicer? Probably. Okay. Make value range. Values 1. Expected vec value. It shouldn't actually be a vec value there. It should be. No, it should be a vec value. But it means that I need to do this, which I think is fine. Ooh, okay, now we're getting into some ownership issues, which is fine because this is just testing. So, Woo. So all I wanted to do here was test two different kinds of values. Thread ID is res1, res2, check res1, check res2, check that they both equal value string. In this case, it's if contains non-number. The non-number here is going to be, for example, string, or rather not a number. And this won't return this, so this test should fail at the moment, but that's fine. 3 pass 1 failed. Yeah, that's correct. And it returns instead invalid digit found by in string, where it expects value in cell is empty. So this is because the error is propagating up from the pass, and this error that's propagating up is giving me this string. Invalid digit found in string, but I haven't been able to actually cast it to my own error type, which is probably what I want to do. I should remember how to do it, but I can't remember. Cast one error type to another in Rust. This error offers a from error. That is, I think, what I want. So if I add, for example, here, I say this value in cell is not a number, comes from the so let me just check what kind of error is going on here. Print line res unwrap error. As ref. Use a move value. Okay. Cargo test. Oops. No capture. Doesn't seem like that actually printed what I wanted it to print. But it did print. Oh. Didn't actually tell me what type it was, but it just printed the string thing. Okay, yeah, here we go. Pass int error. Kind of invalid digit. So the pass int error presumably comes from some standard library. Yes. Have I done that wrong? Yes, I need this macro syntax. cannot find pass int error. And that's because it's not imported properly. It's standard num pass int error. I still feel like that is, so now if I put this as value cell is not a number, from a pass int error, so I have to recreate the actual value that is passed like this. And just for consistency's sake, let's do this. Okay, so even if I do this, it tells me it fails because it doesn't cast it to my error. It still just propagates that other error. So even though I can now cast this error to id error, I haven't told Rust to actually cast that error, so it still just propagates up the pass int error. And one way to do this, I think I might have, if I don't use the anyhow crate, then it is telling me that when I specify this function here, I actually need to return a result and specify a particular type of error, which is my id error. Which is actually, yeah, this is actually the better way that I wanted to do it rather than using the anyhow crate. I think I jumped the gun a bit when using the anyhow crate. Because I want this function, and really any functions in my code base, to always return my kind of error, I can just do that by being specific about the result that I return and saying that it's a result with my generic type in the OK as being whatever I want the function to return, and then my generic error type being the id error type. And this will basically enforce or force me to always ensure that the only kind of error I propagate up is an id error type. And I can, in using this error crate, I can do nice things like casting other errors to my error type using this handy kind of macro syntax. So in here, it's telling me that I can't go from a sheets 4 error to an id error because I haven't been specific about any kind of casting here. The sheets 4 error, I'm going to say, is coming from a sheets 4 error. Yeah. So this first one is fixed because in using this question mark syntax, it now knows that whenever it encounters a sheets 4 error, it should cast it to this anyhow error. No, sorry, not anyhow error. This ed error type. So that first error was fixed, but now this kind of propagation syntax that I had before is no longer correct because I've changed the way that I'm handling errors from this function. And it's telling me that okay, so I think this is the actual correct format that I want to update for there. I'm not using this thing anymore. I'm just straightforwardly returning a result, and that result is the error variant. But in this unpacking operation, this result is actually something different. This is, if it returns through this question mark syntax, it's not actually a failed to retrieve. What's going on here? Did I just do something weird there, or no, something weird's going on with my editor. This is not actually what I wanted to do. This case. This case is actually some sort of different error. That's not a failed to retrieve Google Sheet column, or maybe a failed to retrieve Google Sheet column, but it's not the same kind of failure. Because this is my explicit error checking, which is what I coded in previously. We could still get to this point if the response status is between 200 and 299, but I want to be stricter and say I only want this to not return an error if it's explicitly a 200. So what I actually want is an error here that has an option to be from a sheets 4 error, but is not necessarily, or I just want to create my own sheets 4 error here. Like I was doing earlier. And the sheets 4 error here. Can be an HTTP error, I guess, where HTTP error takes a hyper error and the hyper error has an inner that, yeah. So this is where it gets, I could try to say that I have one error type in my kind of error schema that always goes from a CH4 error and it's failed to retrieve Google Sheet column. And then try to work out what the best error types in those underlying libraries to use is to pass into that when I want to throw my own kind of version of that error. I think what I actually want is to say I do have a failed to retrieve. I just want to create my another more specific error type here, which is Google Sheet API returned success, but not 200 error. And the message here will be Google Sheets returned a success code, but it wasn't 200. And this will basically allow me to say here, I can throw that specific error variant here, or return that specific error event here, and then convert all the other ones to this more generic error. I wonder if there's a way to pull in the underlying error there. Allow change, go here for details. So I want this from syntax, but I want to also take the underlying error if possible. Errors may use error transparent to forward the source and display method straight through to an underlying. Okay, so let's do that. Great. So that's just going to forward the display methods through from there. And then I can, so this is my test 56. Aha, so this is going to be an ed error specifically. Return result. Yeah, and now I think I can just clear this up. Actually, it's gonna let me do this. In why doesn't it like this? Consider specifying the generic arguments. The generic arguments for OK. It's interesting. I've never seen that before. Okay, I'm just going to keep it as it was before. I think it was better that way. function unpack thread IDs is never used. That's because I commented something out. So it's used in the tests now, but it is not used here. And this was just for testing. Remove this mute. Okay. Okay, so now I can run my test properly. Test pass, great. And if I go back to cargo run, great. I've just got my results coming direct from the Google Sheet. Okay, so I'm going to finish things off there for now. Basically, this was reformatting the code so that it is more testable and